Hello and welcome to the Head of the Game podcast. I'm your host, James Oxford, and today I've got Alex West and Chris Byler with me to discuss which NBA team we think could best fit each of the prospects we are looking at come this year's draft. Is this conversation early? Probably, but that's why we are ahead of the game here. Now, before we jump in, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We're also still looking to fill one or two more spots on our team, depending on your area of expertise. So if you'd like to join the team, reach out on X. Now, Chris, I'm going to let you go ahead and start us off with Cooper Flagg here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, James. Cooper Flagg is the most well-known prospect coming into this draft cycle. He is playing with the Team USA already in advance of the Olympics. He's on the select team. We heard about the rave reviews this summer. He's going to be the focal point on a major Duke team. He's, I believe, a preseason All-American already. We're all expecting him to come in and be a phenomenal kind of all-around player this year. The real strength of Flagg, as many of us have heard and scouted and watched over the last couple of years now, is that he's a defensive freak. Um, on our last podcast with Mike Gribanoff, we kind of addressed some of what we're seeing when we watch Flagg. And one thing that I mentioned on the last podcast is that he's got kind of that Triple J, Evan Mobley, Chet Holmgren kind of defensive brain. Mike Gribanoff likened him defensively to like an Anthony Davis kind of prospect. The the thing that I'm really looking for this year is he doesn't have those measurables physically. Like he's listed right now at 6'8" with a 6'11" wingspan. Those are all guys with 7'5", 7'6" wingspans. So he's a defensive freak. He's got that kind of cerebral play style. He's a wonderful rim protector. He's able to kind of play all over the court. I've seen him guard on the perimeter well, but rim protection is his big skill. So I get that we're talking about that kind of defensive juggernaut. But my big question going into this season, what I'm looking for is what does that look like as the size scales up? What is this kind of player in a slightly smaller package than those like really generational defensive guys who have come in the last few years look like at the next level? I wonder if he is playing kind of maybe he's more of an Aaron Gordon style size player with that defensive IQ, that high level defensive IQ. I still think that's all defense in my book. An Aaron Gordon size defender with an elite defensive prospect. But I'm curious to see what we all think of the overall impact by the end of this year of a player of that ilk. Offensively, we want him to shoot. He's made significant progress on that front over the last year. I think we're all hopeful he can space the floor. He's a good passer. He's got good touch in the mid range, and when getting contact around the rim, he's got that nice mid range jump shot where he just seemingly stays in the air forever when he hits contact, and he's fantastic at that. He doesn't hijack the offense. I think he's just going to be able to score in the flow, and he's this elite Spider-Man of a defender and hopefully a developing offensive player. So what do you guys think about that as far as prospect overview?
Yeah, I really think a lot of the points you've made there, Chris, are spot on about Flagg. I think the positionality is the question. We're going to see him play a lot of the four this year at Duke. And then that kind of like segues into my concern. And this has really nothing to do with Flagg. My concern is how often are we going to see situations that Flagg's going to see at the next level while playing at Duke? I don't know, like the style of college, everybody who's been kind of in this game and like there's this sort of jarring difference between like the flow of an NBA game and the isolation and the spacing and all these kinds of things versus when it gets jammed up in college. And I mean, sometimes you watch, like, especially at Cameron, the floor can look this big. It can look like it's in a box. And a lot of times that doesn't play to the strengths of what we've seen for Flagg is this high IQ guy who's moving weak side, who's impacting the game by tipping passes or blocking shots or doing those things. And I do wonder how much of that we're going to get to see and how much of it's going to be left to what we've seen with Team USA or what we've seen in other places, the extrapolation of, I think one of the biggest successes that Flagg has is his ability to defend in space. But, how much of that are we going to get to see? And so I think really that's going to be a big focus is you're going to have to zero in on the specific things you see from him here and there, as opposed to like you're not going to get to see that full flow impact that we want to see at the next level. And so I really think early on, that's the big focus for Flagg is just, let's pick our spots and see where we can see these successes, because what he does do is just impact the game in space, and with a shot blocking in particular. And so I don't know, like play the 4, play the 5. I think ultimately we're going to get to a situation where he's going to be playing a 4. Because of exactly what you highlighted. This is a guy who's not huge, but he does impact the game really well. And so, James, I want to throw this over to you because this leads into like the next question is where does a Cooper Flagg end up in a situation that, highlights what he does really well?
Right. And all of those things were going through my head as I was thinking, what is the best fit for Flagg? Because there's a lot of different directions you can go as far as that conversation. The big thing to me was the measurables don't reflect a center's measurables, as we said, but also the defensive impact does. So I was thinking, is there a place where maybe he can play the 5 and make that impact at the 5, but they can cover for some of the maybe things that he may be struggling with playing the 5 in terms of build and whatnot. I don't know if I came to a perfect conclusion, but the team I'm going to throw out there for our first conversation for Cooper Flagg is going to be the Detroit Pistons. So I think that we have a defensive stud in Asar Thompson next to him who can kind of make up for some of the rebounding concerns that might be there. He rebounds almost, I don't know the per minute average on centers, but I assume his rebounding per minute average is probably pretty similar to most centers in the league right now. So we're already covering the rebounding issue there. Now the size issue is going to be a concern. You have people like Joel Embiid. He's never going to be able to, I think, physically handle a Joel Embiid. So those matchups are, of course, a problem. And you do need other options on your roster where Cooper would need to slide to the 4. But as far as the first team I'm going to throw out, I think he would be a great option spreading the floor for Cade Cunningham, who has just been dying for some floor spacing out there. I'm pretty confident in Cooper Flagg's offensive game as far as shooting the ball and creating for himself, and kind of along with the passing that was mentioned earlier, he's going to be able to find other people who are moving off ball, which again, they do have Asar Thompson, great off ball mover. Ron Holland is another name I want to throw out there, Alex. I know you've been super high on him, and I think just the more I've kind of watched what he was doing last year and what he could do in the NBA, I'm becoming more and more of a fan, I think. So I do kind of have him penciled as a foundational player. I don't know if that's a controversial take. He was taken pretty high, but it was also a weak draft, you could say. So, I wouldn't say that everybody picked in the top 10 as a foundational player from last year's draft necessarily, but I think it's fair to say that about him. Chris, where's your thoughts about Cooper Flagg and the Pistons?
That's interesting. That wasn't one of the teams that jumped out at me. Just for the record, Asar Thompson is an 80th percentile rebounder on offense and defense, so that's a pretty good shout. I think that's interesting. I liked the fit next to Duren because Duren has struggled so much defensively so far. That's kind of the weak spot in his game at this point. And I like that Cooper Flagg fit next to him. That's a lot of athleticism for Cade to be lobbing up to between those two guys as well. You theoretically always have a really nice rim runner or dunker spot guy. And I like the idea of Flagg being on a team where he's got a lob threat at the center position because he is a good passer interior. I like that kind of idea. He's a good put-back guy. Again, that's two of them on the same team. I like doubling down on the strength like that. So that's interesting. It's not one of the teams that I had listed here, but I think that's a lot of fun. What do you think, Alex?
I think we talked about this in pre-show a little bit. I don't think you're going to say a lot of teams are going to be super like if he ends up on the Nets. That's kind of a blank canvas. I mean, yeah, is that going to be good for him? I don't know. It's going to be good for the Nets to find a foundational piece early on. I really think there are a lot of questions about like there are teams in transition this year that are really trying to find themselves. And I think as we go forward, we're going to get answers to this. I think it would be really cool for him to get to play with LaMelo Ball. That'd be fun. Is Charlotte a little too good to land the number 1 pick? Yeah, probably. They're going to be a little frisky, I think. Having him be able to play with a creator like Cade Cunningham is interesting. I really like the fit of Detroit gets super lengthy. They turn into this team that has just a lot of length all over the place. That could be a really fun exploit to do, but it really sums it up to say, and I think we've covered this in a lot of different ways. Cooper Flagg's going to be a huge impact player wherever he ends up. He's the top pick in this draft for a good reason. He'd have been the top pick in the last draft. I mean, this is one of those guys. If you took one of those like 5-year scopes, he's going to be in the top 5 of the past 5 drafts if you drafted them all together. So it doesn't really matter what's going to be able to succeed for him. I really would like to see what he could do as an offensive fulcrum. There's some 3-level shooting there that's exciting. There's the passing that we've talked about. I would like to kind of roll it out there early on in his career. And so in that, keeping with that, the Nets and the Wizards, that's kind of exciting. Like just roll it out there and let's see what happens. And so, but I think there's no talent anywhere in the top 5 or top 8 or whatever you want to talk about that would keep me from drafting Cooper Flagg if I have the number 1 pick. So, okay, I'm going to get it. Let's just add to it. Here's a generational talent. Whatever else we had, whether we have a 4 or a 5 that we don't like, nobody's going to be jumping 25 wins and wanting to skip over Cooper Flagg because of positionality or whatever.
That's interesting. I actually went with Charlotte as my choice for Cooper. I like that fit. I don't think Charlotte has much chance of being one of the top 8 teams in the East, and their draft pick this year is lottery protected. I think they're going to be avoiding that plan. So I think they are going to actively do so. And I like, kind of like I was talking about before, I like the idea of a big center next to Cooper Flagg. We've talked about in the past about how much, what we do as a group kind of think Mark Williams is a player at this level. And so that combination plus Brandon Miller, good passers, and Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball, guys who can score and make stuff happen. We've talked about in the past, last year when we were trying to find a fit for Charlotte, we were so worried about all these kind of subpar defensive guards that might fit next to LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller and make it too much of a chore for Brandon Miller to have to be the primary defensive assignment. Well, suddenly with Mark Williams and Cooper Flagg, you're not super worried about the defense on the perimeter because maybe it's just Cooper Flagg in that role. Maybe he's taking the big wings. I think that's a very realistic outcome, at the next level here. And I like the idea of having that kind of defensive power behind kind of the weak spot that is LaMelo. So I think that would be a pretty impressive rim protection situation. And again, having the lob threat duo for LaMelo and Brandon Miller would be a lot of fun. That's a lot of speed too between Flagg, Brandon Miller, and LaMelo in transition.
And they just drafted Salon, so it's like going back to what I said. Like nobody's gonna. You're not as good as Tijon Salon was, and I really liked him in that class. Like if Cooper Flagg's there, I'm taking him. So I mean, we'll just figure out what happens later.
100%, 100%. So I had the Pistons. Chris, you had the Hornets. Alex, what was your team?
I mean, probably the Hornets. I really like that. Okay. Like I said, I probably skew a little bit the other way of like, yes, you're right, Chris. The protections on the pick and all that, they probably do want to go down. I still just think there might be a little too much talent with the bottom dwellers here. They'd have to jump in the lottery rankings, but I think that'd be a really fun fit.
Well, we've got some pretty flat draft odds these days. I mean, like, through pick number 7, I mean, it's a 12-ish% difference. I mean, there's some range here these days.